Okay, well, I didn't even check what day it is. What is the date? 13th. October the 13th. So here we are, Bible lesson number 239 for those who are keeping track. We're going through all the prophecies of the Bible that are of interest to me. May not be of interest to you, but they're interesting to me. So today it's Isaiah chapters 8 and 9. We'll review chapter 238. I got a bunch of signs of the times and a scripture of the day, and then we'll do chapters 8 and 9 of Isaiah. Dean, open us with a word of prayer.
We just thank you, Heavenly Father, for the privilege to come here today, Lord. Listen to Carl's message of your scriptures. Ask you to speak through him today, that speak the words that he needs to say, and we might learn more about you, Heavenly Father. Ask you to bless this time. We thank you, Lord, for the heavy showers you brought us. We're so thankful, Lord, that you do care. Bless this day, and Jesus, let me pray, amen.
Amen. On lesson 238, we learned something strange about the Bible, and that is it encodes words on occasion. There is an encoding process called Alban, in which you take the Hebrew alphabet and write 11 characters on one line, and then the next 11 characters on the lower line, and then you exchange the letters between the words that you were going to write. And in this word tabil, if you do that in Hebrew and make that encoding, it spells Ramallah. So, and there are 3 types of encodings in the Bible like that. So, well, actually 4 if you consider the equidistant letter sequences. So the Bible is a very complicated book. And however deep you think you are in it, you ain't even scratched the surface. So God, in chapter 7, made a deal to Ahaz, the king. He says, hey, you ask me something tough. Ask me anything you want, from the heights of heaven to the depths of the sea, and I'll answer it. And Ahaz was profoundly perplexed. And he said, I'm not going to tempt you, Lord. And so the Lord said, well, here, I'll give you one. And that a virgin would conceive and a son would be born, and his name would be Emmanuel. What does Emmanuel mean in Hebrew?
God with you.
Oh, right, yes. God with us. So, and then he prophesies later that he would send the king of Assyria, and the king of Assyria was going to take him into captivity. Now, this was around 733 AD, BC, before Christ. So, and sure enough, that happened. In 722, Shalmaneser V, the Assyrian king, invaded the northern kingdom and took Israel captive. And from that moment on, they left the stage of secular history, and they're not spoken of much in the Bible, except in 2nd Esdras. And of course, if you try to find 2nd Esdras in your Bible, you'll be frustrated because it ain't there. Unless you happen to have an original 1611 King James. And if you have one of those, 2nd Esdras is in there.
Why did they take that out?
In 1885, the British Bible Society and the Puritans decided to purify the Bible, and they took out a whole selection of books called the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha implies that these books are of somewhat lesser value, and the Catholics kept some of them in there, but mostly any book that you find written, any Bible that you find written after 1885, it doesn't have the Apocrypha. Now, I happen to have a copy of an 1864 Bible, and it has the Apocrypha in it. It's one of these big Bibles, it's about like that, about that thick. Beautiful book. It's a collector's item. But I'll bring it up here someday and show you. It's really interesting. So, at any rate, God prophesies that this razor from Assyria would come, and when you shave your head and your arms and shave all the hair off of you, that's a sign of mourning. And Israel certainly was in mourning because they went into captivity, and the land they left did in fact become full of briars and thorns. Now, the interesting thing about this prophecy is not the fact that it was fulfilled, but it was fulfilled again. Because remember what happened in, 70 AD? Titus came down, invaded Jerusalem, and, well, took everybody in captivity, many of them in captivity, destroyed the city, and then in 135 AD, Hadrian fought the Jews in the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and Hadrian was so mad because the Jews killed a couple of his legions of soldiers that when he won the battle, he pulled every Jew and every Israelite out of the community, excised them, and threw them to the seven winds. There are seven winds? Maybe there are four winds. However many winds there are, that's where they went.
Seven seas.
Seven seas, seven winds. Keep me on the right path here. So, at any rate, at 135, the land was vacant of all Jews. Not only did they get rid of the Jews, but they sowed salt in the soil so it wouldn't produce anything, and then they renamed the whole area Palestine, which means Philistines. They renamed it after the Philistines, and it remained that way to this day. And most people, the Palestinians claim that they have an infinite history of being in the land. Well, no, they don't. So, at any rate, the land of Israel would become full of briars and thorns, and that's the way it was. In 444 AD, a French traveler visited the Holy Land, and he wrote a book. And in that book, he recorded that he had never seen such a desolate place. It doesn't look like there'd ever been a city there or anything. It was completely devoid of people, and it was just remarkable how vacant the place was. And then again, Samuel Clemens, back in the 1800s. Anybody remember who Samuel Clemens was? Mark Twain. By the way, what does the word Mark Twain mean anyway? Anybody know?
It is a riverboat. Means the second mark. This is a depth measurement. Mark Twain, so they could navigate the boats through the river.
Yeah. So he
was there.
He was there. He probably knew Mark Twain. But Mark Twain made a visit there, and lo and behold, he made the same comment. He said the place was completely desolate. But then, of course, the Balfour Agreement came around 1917, and the Jews were allowed to return to the land, and strangely, it became fertile again. And since 1948, when they became a nation, you can check the rainfall gauge. It went up about 10% a year for several years. And then suddenly Israel is providing all of the produce for, well, not all of it, but a great amount of produce produced in Israel goes to Europe. So they are the breadbasket of Europe in one sense. So,
Because of the Lord.
yeah, when they came back into the land, he removed the plague. Moving right along here. Now, do y'all feel better now? Religious institutions should lose their tax-exempt status for same-sex marriage opposition. There you have it. You want to know who the enemy is? Now you. Presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke said he would strip religious institutions of their tax-exempt status if they oppose same-sex marriages. And then he said,
Fortunately, we're a long way away from him having any say over that matter.
Unfortunately, we had to still see.
Unfortunately, matter.
It's just to me remarkable that any politician would come up with something like this and have an expectation of winning. I mean, that's bizarre.
The Philistines.
But he said that when old Don Lemon There's another fine character in the CNN news.
Does the church hard up?
When he asked Beto, do you think religious institutions like colleges, churches, charities should lose their tax-exempt status if they oppose same-sex marriage? And Lemon replied, or O'Rourke replied with an unequivocal yes, and stressed that as president he would make punishing religious organizations a priority. There you have it. At least this guy is telling it, well, he's giving us the truth. So now you can make an informed.
Pat has a piece of paper that, what was that? What was that again?
He's been in prison.
Yeah, Beto O'Rourke has an interesting history. Hey, and then our A.G. Barr slams ascendancy of secularism for America's woes. And interesting. On Friday, he reported that he blamed a lot of the woes of our country, including drugs, violence, poor mental health, on secularism. And he says we see a growing ascendancy of secularism and doctrine of moral relativism. The Hill reported, basically every major of social pathology continues to gain ground. He went on to describe the consequence of this moral upheaval. Along with the wreckage of the family, we are seeing record levels of depression and mental illness, dispirited young people, soaring suicide rates, increasing numbers of angry and alienated young males. Have we seen any of those? Oh, you bet. And an increase in senseless violence and deadly drug epidemic. Over 70,000 people a year die from drug overdoses. Well, that means we need to ban guns, by George. Those drug overdoses are caused by guns. And he also slammed so-called progressives, saying that many are among the militant secularists.
Well, secularism is just another way that tells you Satan is in your mind. He destroys the mind and the heart, and everything else follows.
Yep, yes.
To show my stupidity, but what is secularism?
Somebody give us a good definition. A secularist is one who he sees the world as devoid of any divine knowledge or plan.
O'Reilly used to call it the secular progressives against the traditional conservative tradition.
It's the indifference to or rejection or exclusion of religion and religious considerations.
Yeah, that's what I said. That's what I said.
Which would make sense why they would be so environmentally conscious, because this is all we've got. We've got to make it last forever.
Yep.
Which you've got no
And
control
pretty soon we'll
over
be
that.
eating babies.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that'll take care of it. Here's another one of my favorites. He's quoting the Bible.
Who is that guy?
Spartacus.
Spartacus.
Great.
Cory Booker, he quotes Micah to us. He says, "What do you want from your Lord, but what is it you want from your people?" Booker said in response, "Which is to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly." Walk humbly, and so for me, I cannot allow as a leader that people are going to use religion as a justification for discrimination. There.
Yeah,
Huh?
Isn't it walk humbly with your God?
Mm-hmm. Well, he kind of leaves part of that out. I was surprised he even knew where Micah was. I figured he thought Micah was an NBA star. But if you're going to quote the Bible, the whole thing. If a man lies with a male as he lies with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. I wonder why he didn't quote that one. I guess it didn't fit. Oh, well. Liberal congregations in 5 states move towards leaving the UMC. Oh, United Methodist Church. 11 liberal United Methodist congregations in 5 states from the deep south to the far north have publicly announced they plan on taking at least initial steps towards leaving the United Methodist Church because They are protesting over the denomination's continued official traditionalist policies on marriage and sexual morality. There you have it. Now that,
They're gonna tear those pages out of their Bible when they leave that church?
absolutely. They will make their own. As Timothy says, preach the word, be ready in season and out of season, convince, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and teaching. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers, and they will turn aside their ears from the truth and be turned aside to fables. We got a whole country here that's leaning on fables. Isaiah chapter 8. Now remember, Isaiah was written 700 years or more before Christ. And so, yes.
Before you leave gay marriage, did you see Elizabeth Warren? This man said, well, what would you say to me when I say that I'm for marriage between one man and one woman? She said, well, I would say go marry one woman if you could find one. You know, real hateful about regular marriage.
Well, you know, we're at that time now when being a Christian, it's a radical thing. You know, they used to take Christians and use them for target practice, for lamps. They, you know, light up a Christian and like some of the, who was it, the crazy Roman Caesar that did that? He lit up his courtyard with the bodies of dead Christians. Nero, yeah. We're getting there real fast. This world is going downhill like a rocket. So Isaiah chapter 8, Isaiah written sometime 700 years before Christ, and the particular chapter is at least 733 AD. And so in chapter 8 it begins, moreover the Lord said to me, take a large scroll and write on it a man with a man's pen concerning Mather Shalal Haz-Baz. Now that means, and why they just didn't write it I don't know, but speed the spoil and hasten the booty. And I will take for myself a faithful witness to record Uriah the priest of Zechariah and Zechariah the son of Jebechiah. And I went to the prophetess, and she conceived and bore me a son. And then the Lord said to me, call his name Mather Shalal Haz-Baz. For before that child will have knowledge to cry, my father or my mother, the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be taken away before the king of Assyria. Now, this was about 733, and it was in 722 that the king of Assyria, Shalansher V, came down and pulled the northern kingdom into captivity and overran Damascus. And the Lord also spoke to me again, saying, inasmuch as these people refuse the waters of Shiloah that flow softly, and rejoice in Rezin and Remaliah's son, now therefore, behold, the Lord brings up over them the waters of the river, strong and mighty, the king of Assyria, and all of his glory, and he will come over the channels and go over his. Now, that's a map of ancient Assyria. And if you will recall, as we have spoken several times about the Middle East understanding of a prophecy, namely the Hebrew understanding, and that is, once a prophecy is spoken, it doesn't necessarily mean that a single event cancels it out. In other words, it's a pattern. And you can see that pattern happening over and over again. Now, if this king of Assyria who was coming toward Israel was a sign of a future event, we might look for somebody coming out of Assyria going to Israel with the same intent and the same result, if Israel behaves the way they did back in those days. So just for your information, that Assyrian region covers Iran and Iraq. Do we see anybody over there that has the potential to overrun Israel?
What about Turkey? Turkey's doing it right now.
Turkey, a big chunk of Turkey is included in that too. So, yeah, you could make that argument. And there's Iran. So you can see within ancient Assyria, Iran is part of that ancient land. Now, moving right along. And he will pass through Judah, and he will overthrow and pass over, and he will reach up to your neck. And stretching out his wings, he will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. That's strange. Wonder how that got in there. So be shattered, O you people, and be broken in pieces. Give ear, all of you far countries. Gird yourselves, but be broken in pieces. Gird yourselves, but be broken in pieces. Take counsel together, but it will come to nothing. Speak the word, but it will not stand, for the Lord is with you. For the Lord has spoke to us with a strong hand and instructed me that I should not walk in the way of his people, saying, do not say a conspiracy concerning all that this people call a conspiracy, nor be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled. For the Lord of hosts you shall hallow. Let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. And he will be as a sanctuary, a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to both houses of Judah, and as a trap to snare the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Both houses of Israel. So who is Israel? Well, Israel was that northern kingdom, the 10 tribes. And Judah, who was the inhabitants of Jerusalem, is Judea, the southern kingdom. So the southern kingdom, which was composed of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, they escaped from this attack of Assyria in 722. But they continued on for about another 200 years, and in 586, they went into captivity under Nebuchadnezzar and were taken into Babylonian captivity. So they were all removed from the land. And as many among them as stumble, they shall fall and be broken, be snared and taken. Bind up the testimony, seal up the law among my disciples, and I will wait on the Lord who hides his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. He hides his face from Jacob. Not a good sign, but when those who are God's people turn their backs on him, he turns his face away from them. There is a hedge of protection, you can argue, in the scripture for the people of God when they follow his ways. When they turn their back on him, he hides his face, and the hedge of protection that was there is removed. So hold that thought for a chapter. Here am I and the children whom the Lord has given me. We are signs and wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts who dwells in Mount Zion. How in the world are the children of Israel signs and wonders? Anybody got a clue?
Maybe their traditions, their feast days, or signs.
You could argue that there are signs. You can also argue that they are virtual oracles of God, because not everything that we know about them is found in the Old Testament. You know, they have their written, or not written, but their oral traditions in the Mishnah, and they have their writings. And a lot of those were inspired by God. So you can argue that these are signs and wonders. And the very fact that they're still identifiable, at least the Jews, are still identifiable people today. And these people have been on planet Earth for, well, whenever Jacob came into being. When was that? A long time ago. Thousands of years. I don't think there's any other people group that can trace their origins back for 3,000-4,000 years. And when they say to you, seek those whom are mediums and wizards who whisper and mutter, should not a people seek their God? Should they seek the dead on behalf of the living? Do we see that any time in the recent past? I hate to bring it up, but Ronald Reagan's wife, did you know that she consulted with a medium before any time Ronald would go out and leave the White House? Yes. She had her own diviner. Strange. But then we have a new president. And what was President Trump's wife's name? Melania. You know what the first thing she did when she got into the White House? What was it? She had an exorcist come in and go through every room in the place. She was not stupid. So,
She's kind of pretty too.
boy, well, we could go into this further. We will hold that one for a future event.
Let's table that.
My mistake.
To the law and to the testimony, if they do not speak according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. Do we see anybody in this day and age who has no light in them? I'll leave it to you to figure that one out. They will pass through the hard-pressed and the hungry, and it shall happen when they are hungry that they will be enraged and curse their king and their God and look upward. Then they will look to the earth to see trouble and darkness, gloom of anguish, and they will be driven into darkness. Curse their king. We got anybody here that would curse their king, their president? Oh, I think so. So this people will be darkness. Okay, moving right along to chapter 9, because chapter 8 didn't really have a lot in it, so I thought we'd do chapter 9 also. Nevertheless, the gloom will not be upon her who is distressed, as when at first he lightly esteemed the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward more heavily oppressed her by way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, in the Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who walk in darkness have seen a great light, and those who dwelt in the land of the shadow of death, upon them the light has shined. You have multiplied the nation and increased its joy. They will rejoice before you according to the joy of the harvest, as men rejoice when they divide the spoil. So a great light is coming. Anyone care to hazard a guess whom the great light might be? Figure that one out. For you have broken the yoke of his burden and the staff of his shoulder and the rod of the oppressor, as in the day of Midian. For every warrior's sandal from the noisy battle and the garments roiled in blood will be used for burning and for fuel of fire. Now this is strange. It just comes in right out in the middle of nowhere. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. I wonder who that would be. Well, the last chapter it talked about the virgin giving birth to a son called Emmanuel. Well, here we got some more details about him and all of his titles. And he is called Everlasting Father. I thought he was the Son. That too? Oh, how can that be?
Trinity.
Oh, one of those deals, huh? 3 in 1? Now here is the shocker. Of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end. Did you grasp that? It's not that his government and peace will be no end, but the increase. Do you see where we're going with this? It looks like he right now, with the creation of humankind, is creating a management team. And the management team is going to manage this increase, which is going on forever. And you've heard about the pyramid schemes? This is a big pyramid scheme, only we're at the top of the pyramid. This is kind of amazing to me. And of course, I can't possibly understand it all, but if these words be correct, God has big plans. And that this human existence that we are going through right now is just preparation for something very big. So, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it, to establish it with judgment and justice, from this time forward and forever, the zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. What's this title, Lord of Hosts? What's that mean? What's a host? You could interpret host as armies, Lord of armies. Now, there is a church right off the loop in Houston, and it's called it's Berea or Berea. I think it's a similar name to that. They have taken this literally, and they have a church, and right over the baptistry, a picture of a B-52 on a bombing run. And they believe this God of hosts is a God of war, and he's a warrior, and they elevate policemen and the military. And it's a very unusual group.
Are they Jews? It sounds like their name is Jewish.
Well, their name is taken from the Berean church. If you recall, the Bereans were those who took the word with joy, and then they went home and studied to see if those words were really true. And so that's what the guy was getting at. I wish I could remember his name. Hal Lindsey went there for a while. So, but the guy has really good teaching, but on this one area, he kind of looks like he's a little out there in left field to me. But at any rate, the Lord of Hosts is one of the reasons that they have adopted this structure. And the Lord sent a word against Jacob, and it has fallen on Israel. Now, how does that happen? Sounds like we got, the same thing spoken of twice. A word that went against Jacob and has fallen on Israel. What was Jacob's name changed to?
Israel.
Yeah, we got the same thing twice here, seems to me. I'm sure there was something intended here that was beyond our understanding, but the word that went against Jacob fallen on Israel, and perhaps we're talking about Israel, the nation, the northern kingdom. We'll ponder that in a minute. And all the people will know, and Ephraim and the inhabitant of Samaria, who say with pride and arrogance of heart, the bricks have fallen down, but we will rebuild with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, we will replace them with cedars.
The harbinger.
Hey, there are some people that are... This is the passage that was expounded upon by one Jonathan Cahn. And if you've ever listened to him, he's got some interesting stories to tell. Now, the interesting part, he has facts, and he takes his facts and he twists them into a story. And I guess it makes it easier for some people to read. But if you took all of the facts, of which there are allegedly 9, and you could put them on one sheet of paper. And if you could just spread all of the other compost out, you could get through this in, about 10 minutes. But I guess you can't do that and sell many books. But we're going to look at this. There are 9 harbingers that Cahn points out. And the interesting thing is, these were directed at Jacob, and it has fallen on Israel. So, Genesis chapter 48. Who do we need to find in the end days to locate Israel? You have got to find the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, right? Because when Jacob blessed, or Israel, blessed the sons of Joseph, Ephraim, Manasseh, he said, let my name be upon them. He didn't say that to anybody else. So if you can find Ephraim and Manasseh in the end times, you can find who this was directed at. Now, strangely, Cahn didn't pick that up in his book, because he just says in there, well, any nation that holds the value of Israel is going to be a participant in these harbingers. Well, I want to suggest to you that when that edict went out to Jacob and fell on Israel, it fell on the United States. And it makes more credibility, I think, to his arguments here. So at any rate, the first harbinger is the breach. In 732 BC, the hedge of protection was removed and Israel's enemies invaded the land and wreaked havoc. The calamity traumatized the nation, but it took on a limited scale, as with 9/11. The warning was the removal of the hedge. On September 11, 2001, America's hedge of protection was removed, and the breach of American security was a sign that God had lifted his protective hand. Can you make that argument? Well, I think you can make that argument. How many times has the United States, since its inception, been invaded and been attacked? Not never. Not never. It never had been. And I remember that day. And with particular interest, I was watching the news commentators that were covering it. And I heard one lady, and I don't even remember who she was. It was the first time I ever heard her use the name of God in reverence. And she said, "Oh my God." I don't remember her name. I just remember she was a part of the usual cabal of progressive reporters. But she used the name of the Lord with reverence when she saw those planes flying into the towers. And it was the first time in a long time that people were searching for reasons and help and hope in a disastrous time. The second one is the Assyrian terrorists. It was a dark shadow of the Assyrian terror that loomed over the kingdom of Israel, the danger against which the prophets had warned. And when years later Israel's final judgment came, the Assyrians would again be the means through which it would happen. So too, the attack on America is carried out by terrorists. The Assyrians were a Semitic people and the children of the Middle East, and so too were the terrorists of 9/11. And I'll bet you if you check their genealogy, you would find that some of them came from ancient Assyria. Kind of interesting, isn't it? There's ancient Assyria again, and that whole region of the world is just full of jihadis, Islam, the Mohammedans, these people that think it a good thing to sacrifice your sons for Allah. So that's kind of interesting. We're just studying here.
Apparently we have quite a few here already.
Oh, we got quite a few here.
You're quiet.
But they're, the way the Islamics work is they move into a country in small numbers. And then they try to change rules and regulations to gain a foothold. And then when they gain a foothold, they bring in more, and they outproduce that country until they're in the majority, and then they exert their will.
And they have lots of babies.
And they have lots of babies.
Omar and her new boyfriend were at that riot after the Minnesota riot.
Yep, they were there, probably inciting the riot.
Antifa, Omar and her new boyfriend were after the Minnesota riot.
And every time the Muslims have a victory, they build a mosque. How do you think the mosque, the Dome of the Rock, got there? That was by, who was the guy who built the mosque? Mosque of Omar, of course. Omar. When he overran Jerusalem, had a victory, he built a mosque. If you'll recall, they tried to build a mosque very close to 9/11, and somehow we didn't let them do it. But they tried. They do that to demonstrate their power and their control. The most visible signs of the attack of Israel were that the fallen buildings and the heap of ruins of fallen bricks. The third harbinger is a sign of the fallen bricks and the fallen buildings. On September the 11th, 2001, Americans were confronted with the same sign: fallen bricks of fallen buildings and the wreckage on ground zero. America was not turning back to God. It was short-lived spiritual revival that never came. And there's the picture. Everything has fallen down. The fourth harbinger is the tower. Israel defiantly began rebuilding on devastated ground, vowing to rebuild higher and stronger. Oh, are we asking God to help us with this? No. So too, in the wake of 9/11, American leaders vowed to rebuild at ground zero, higher and stronger. The Freedom Tower begins to rise at ground zero. Those who were involved with it, they acted unwittingly. They'd never read their Bible to know that what they were doing was they were invoking a curse upon our country. And so what do we got? Well, we got a new tower. I wouldn't give you a plug nickel for that thing standing up for very much longer.
That's like Babylon.
Yeah.
The footing's there, but it keeps getting knocked over.
Just keeps falling down. The fifth harbinger is the Gazet stone. We will rebuild with quarried stone. The Israelites carved out quarried stone from a mountain rock and brought it to the ground of destruction where the clay bricks once stood. 3 years after 9/11, a stone was quarried out of a mountain rock in New York. This massive stone was brought back to the ground zero, and in ancient Israel, this stone became the misplaced embodiment of the nature of the nation's confidence in its own power. Oh, they knocked us down, but we're going to make it better now. So, to the massive stone at ground zero became symbolic cornerstone of the rebuilding. Public ceremonies accompanied the stone's placement. Plans to rebuild at ground zero would be frustrated for years, but eventually they would remove the stone from ground zero together. There's your stone. We would rebuild with Gazet stones. Gazet means shaped or hewn stone. And so there we got ourselves a hewn stone, just like it would require. Yeah, more than 10 pounds.
Yeah.
And the sixth harbinger is the sycamore tree. Sycamores have been cut down. The attack on ancient Israel resulted in the striking down of the sycamore tree, a biblical sign of national judgment. A fallen sycamore is a sign of the uprooting, a warning, and in ignoring the warning, it becomes a prophecy of judgment. On 9/11, as the North Tower fell, it sent debris and wreckage which struck and uprooted an object, a sycamore tree growing at ground zero. The tree was made into a symbol and named the sycamore of ground zero. Where it fell in ancient Israel, it prophesied the nation's downfall and the end of its kingdom. When that happens to America, it depends on whether or not we're going to take heed to the warning. I bet you there is the sycamore that was knocked down.
We have sycamore trees here.
Don't think so. I don't think I would know a sycamore if it walked up. I know cedar, though. I know what a cedar tree looks
I
like.
don't like cedar, I'd rather have sycamores.
Me
The
too.
ones that are sticking up and their foot's going, their foot, but the bottom goes into the water.
Oh, really?
We have a ton of them, like Lake Austin.
Are they? I thought those were cypress trees.
Well, maybe I'm.
Boy, I talked him out of that one real fast. The seventh harbinger, the Eretz tree. Eretz means cedar or something like that. So we will plant cedars in their place. In defiance of God, the Israelites replaced the fallen sycamore with a cedar tree. The cedar, being stronger than a sycamore, becomes a symbol of the nation's arrogant hope that it will emerge from the crisis stronger than before. The English name for this tree is cedar. However, the Hebrew word is eretz. Eretz stands not only for cedar, but for conifer tree of the Panacea family. In November of 2003, a tree was lowered at the corner of ground zero into the soil where the fallen sycamore had once stood. The tree was a conifer, a Panacea tree, the biblical Erez. A ceremony was held around that tree, and too, it became a symbol entitled the Tree of Hope. There is always hope. A nation's true hope is found only in God. And there is the tree.
Okay, wait a minute. You guys beat me up. I don't blame you. The Pat said, what'd you say?
That's just it. They're right.
Okay. That was partially wrong.
I knew that marriage was never going to last.
She's in for a while.
And here's what happened to our tree of hope. It died. But all these trees around it all died. And nobody had figured out why. But they died. Now, the utterance. Now, this is where it's a bit of a stretch to me. But we'll go ahead and read it because, well, the guy made a lot of money off of this book, so you got to read it, right? The eighth harbinger was the public speaking of an ancient vow of defiance. This is the harbinger to manifest. The vow would have to be spoken in the nation's capital by a national leader, as it had been in ancient Israel. By September 11th, 2004, every object mentioned in the prophecy of Isaiah 9:10 had been manifested. The public utterance of the prophecy had to be publicly, which happened on September 11th, 2004, when Vice Presidential candidate John Edwards, now there's a fine fellow for you, giving a speech in the capital city, quoted this exact scripture word for word in Washington, D.C. Without realizing it, he was joining the two nations together, and without realizing it, pronouncing judgment on America. The ancient and modern were bound together. The ninth harbinger, the prophecy. The ninth harbinger is the proclaiming of an ancient vow as prophecy, as a matter of public record. Spoken before the words come true. On September 12, 2001, the day after 9/11, America issued its official response to the attack. The one in charge of issuing the response was Tom Daschle, fine senator from I don't know where. And he closed his speech, he made a declaration. He promised the ancient vow of defiance, word for word, to the world. By doing so, he prophesied the nation's future course, all of which came to pass. Therefore, the Lord will set up the adversaries of reason against him and spur his enemies on, and the Syrians before and the Philistines behind, and they shall devour Israel with an open mouth. But for all his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. What that means is he has relieved himself of some anger with his judgment. And it says his hand is stretched out still. It's stretched out like this. So, you want some more? That's basically. For the people do not turn to him who strikes them, nor do they seek the Lord of hosts. Oh, is that a rational comment on our nation? I think so. Therefore, the Lord will cut off the head and the tail from Israel, palm branch and bulrush in one day. The elder and the honorable, he is the head. The prophet who teaches lies, he is the tail. For the leaders of this people cause them to err, and those who are led by them are destroyed. Do we have leaders today that cause the people to err? Let me count the ways. And those who are led by them are destroyed. We know there's destruction coming. We know it isn't very far away. In this class, we have just studied and been made aware of the prophecies in the Revelation and in Joel. Revelation talks about this planet being hit with meteorites, the water's turning red, people dying by the billions. And then it talks in Joel about the sun producing 7 times the heat in one day. Well, we know these are all elements of systems that have been here for a long time. And that is Nibiru, who came through here in 1453 BC and was the mechanism which caused the children of Israel to leave Egyptian captivity. In Joel, the sun heating up 7 times. We now know that that happens on a regular basis. Every 12,000 years, the sun goes into what's called a micronova, and it blows out its external shell, and heat and junk goes flying through the solar system. And we have noted with that Arctic expedition in 1949 that This has happened every 12,000 years for the last 72,000 years. Yes.
Wasn't it 12,658 or am I
Well, it's actually 12,068 years.
68, okay.
Every 12,068 years, the sun goes nuts. And if you listen to those who talk about the sun, they say that, well, when it novas, it just blows the whole thing up, and all you're left is a neutron star. Well, no, that's not what happened at all. Mostly what happens when a sun novas, it blows off its outer shell, and it does it repeatedly. And you saw me bring a chart up. There's at least 12 of these things in our galaxy that we know they do it because we see it from telescopes. They blow off their outer shell and then they go dormant for a set period of time, and then periodically they blow it off again. Well, our sun is no different.
You won't need to use your microwave no more.
If you are here, you will be microwaved. That's right.
What about the underground tunnels? Would they have generators that would be able to cool the underground tunnels enough to survive that?
No.
Well, here's the story. This is an instantaneous event that lasts for probably minutes or hours, not days and weeks. And so that initial surge of electromagnetic energy will be over with pretty quick. But it's so intense that at the one time it happened, it boiled up 1,000 foot of ocean water and put it into the atmosphere. And ever since then, 12,000 years ago, the world has been warming up because that water, which blowed up into the atmosphere, it fell as snow over the poles, and that's where the Ice Age came from.
But do you think they could survive that? NASA told them.
No.
If you got underground and had enough stores, yeah, you could survive it.
That's what they
And the Bible says that's right. But whoever is on the side of the earth when that thing happens, the chances of you surviving are slim or none unless you were way deep in the earth at the time. Because the Bible clearly says that all men are burnt up. So, at any rate, the people are caused to err by their leadership. Therefore, the Lord will have no joy in their young men, nor mercy on their fatherless widows, for everyone is a hypocrite and an evildoer. Take that. And every mouth speaks folly. For all his anger is not turned away, but his hand is still stretched out. Well, if everyone is a hypocrite and everyone is an evildoer, where did the righteous man go?
Rapture.
The righteous man vanished, according to Micah 7, and no one took it an account. Where did he go?
Go ahead, Gary.
No, I don't know where he went. He got lost.
Aliens took him.
Aliens took him. For wickedness burns as a fire, and it shall devour with briars and thorns, and kindle in the thickets of the forest. They shall mount up like rising smoke. Through the wrath of the Lord of hosts, the land is burned up, and the people shall be as fuel for the fire, and no man shall spare his brother. Well, we all thought this was metaphors or similes or something. No, it's not. It's going to happen just like the Bible said it would. And if you want details, just read the book of Revelation, because it speaks of these events happening and billions of people being exterminated from planet Earth. And he shall snatch on the right hand and be hungry. He shall devour on the left hand and not be satisfied. Every man will eat the flesh of his own arm. Manasseh will devour Ephraim, Manasseh, and together they will be against Judah. For all this, his anger is not turned away, but his hand is outstretched still. Can you see this? Manasseh will devour Ephraim. Who is Manasseh in the end times? That's the U.S. of A. And his brother is Ephraim, who is Great Britain. Britain, covenant land. British, covenant man. And so it says here, when we're all gone, Ephraim and Manasseh are going to fight, and they're going to go against Judah. So we got civil war here in the most extreme terms. And the question being, of course, where are we? Because we are righteous.
Zoom and boom.
That's it. And righteous not by virtue of performance, righteous by virtue of faith. Happy is the man who without any works to his credit simply puts his faith in the one who acquits the guilty. His faith is accounted as righteousness. So we're righteous. The righteous can't be here.
Isn't Ephraim the younger, not Manasseh?
That is correct, because Jacob swapped his hands, and he gave the greater blessing to Ephraim, even though Manasseh was the older. And if you look at history, Ephraim, Great Britain came up before the United States, and then the United States came up and became a singular great nation. Ephraim, in Genesis 48, said he would be a nation and a company of nations. And that's exactly what happened to Great Britain. It became a nation and a commonwealth of nations. The end. Yes?
We could talk about the heat from above, and also heat down below, so if you dig deep enough, it's going to get just as hot as it is up above.
Well, you don't want to go down too deep. I can testify to that because we did logs when I was between my junior and senior year for Schlumberger, and we had a well that we were logging is 20,000 feet deep just outside Elk City, Oklahoma. And we would get, and we had a thermometer that we taped onto the drilling tool, and when it got down to the bottom, it was a maximum recording thermometer, so we could tell what the temperature was way down at the bottom of the hole. And it was, if I recall, just under 200 degrees.
Yeah. I heard 10,000 feet. I heard 10,000 feet, but then look at the volcanoes, We know it's pretty hot down there because when they explode.
Well, that's right. But the volcanoes are a rupture between the mantle and the next layer, the fluid layer below. If you just stay in the mantle, it gets warmer and warmer. But if you happen to get into a chute, a plume, that's thousands of degrees. So,
where's Hades?
Where's Hades? I think it's down in the Caribbean. Oh.
In the bottomless pit. So, in the bottomless pit, could Earth be, it's not flat, it rotates, so there's no bottom. So,
well, there's.
In the bottom of the earth.
Well, there are some arguments that say that maybe that is where hell is located. I don't know. I don't want to find out. But I know it's pretty hot down there just based on my own personal experience. Yes?
Jonathan Cahn has written a new book now called The Oracle. Have you
Read
read that one?
that one too. I got it.
Oh, what? The Oracle?
It's the same format. He takes a little bit of information and blows it through about 12 chapters. And so you have to go through all 12 chapters to sort out the meat. But he's got an awful lot of potatoes in there. But Jonathan Cahn is an interesting guy. I think he has revelations given to him that are divinely sourced.
Well, I did not know, but he was not a Christian. He became a Christian. And I was.
Well, he's a Messianic Jew.
Well, yeah.
Oh, yeah, so he wasn't a Christian.
Yeah.
Sounds like Paul, doesn't it?
He was an atheist.
Right, he was an atheist.
Yeah, I did not know he was an atheist.
But there's lots of information that's available to us today that we've never had before. And the picture keeps getting clearer and clearer as to where we are and what we have to look forward to. And everything that I see says that the Lord is very, very near, and it ain't going to be long before we get out of here. I just wish it would hurry up. I'm getting really tired.
Today be good.
What?
Today would be good.
Yeah, today would be good. But it would mess up my theology, so we're going to have to wait till next September.
Just to add real quick, I got a couple of announcements, but going through